President Donald Trump arrived at Chesapeake Naval Base in Virginia, the largest in the nation. His motorcade rolled through the gates as sailors stood at attention, lined up in sharp formation. Among them was Petty Officer Luke Harrison, quiet 28-year-old sailor with steady eyes and a flawless salute. Luke never imagined he would see the president in person. Yet here he was, uniform crisp, shoes gleaming, heart racing. Something about the moment carried more weight than any inspection he had stood in before. His fingers brushed the worn photo tucked into his breast pocket. For Luke, today wasn't about politics or speech, as it was about a promise. Attention, a voice rang out. Trump emerged from the black SUV, flanked by Secret Service, his demeanor serious but observant. He began shaking hands as he moved down the line. When he reached Luke, the sailor froze, then snapped the sharpest salute of his life. But as his hand lowered, his eyes brimmed with tears. Trump paused. "You okay, sailor?" Luke tried to speak, but couldn't. He whispered something so faint that no one else heard. Whatever it was made Trump's expression shift from composed to shaken. He stared at Luke as if time itself had stopped. The silence stretched. Officers nearby stiffened, unsure whether they had just witnessed a breach of protocol or something more profound. Finally, Trump cleared his throat and said, "Come with me." Secret Service closed in as Luke followed. Wide-eyed, they slipped into a small room off the main hangar. Trump's tone softened. "What did you say, out there?" Luke swallowed. "Hard, sir. My father told me that if I ever met you, I had to salute you for him. He never got the chance." Trump's face changed. "What happened to your father?" Luke pulled the photo from his paqueta, smiling man in uniform. "He died in 2005. Navy veteran, cancer. His last words were about you." For a long moment, the room was silent. Trump studied the photo. Luke's voice trembled. "Commander Nathan Harrison, my dad. 22 years of service. Before he passed, he made me promise 2 things. Join the Navy, and if I ever met you, salute you with honor. He believed in you, even when others didn't." Trump leaned back, visibly moved. "That's a heavy promise to carry." Luke nodded. "I've carried it every day since. I didn't think it would hit me this hard." Trump placed the photo gently on the table. "You honored him more than words can say." Luke whispered. "We didn't always agree, but he loved this country. He believed in you." Trump grew quiet. "Tell me more about him." "He taught me to swim, to shoot, to salute. But more than that, he taught me to stand for something, even if it meant standing alone." Trump nodded slowly. "Sounds like a man worth honoring." Luke's eyes glistened. "I just hope I'm making him proud." "You are," Trump said firmly. For the first time in years, Luke felt something he hadn't before: closure. Meanwhile, outside, the press whispered impatiently. As the band stretched its performance, inside, Trump picked up the photo again. After a pause, he stood. "Follow me." Back in the hangar, cameras clicked furiously as Trump approached the podium. He glanced at his prepared remarks, then set them aside. "I came here today to speak about defense budgets and operations. But instead, I met a sailor who reminded me why any of this truly matters." He motioned toward Luke. "Petty Officer Luke Harrison carries with him a final wish from his late father, a Navy commander who devoted his life to this nation. Today, that wish was fulfilled with a salute decades in the making." The hangar fell silent. Trump's voice softened. "Sometimes a single whisper can silence 1,000 speeches. Today, I heard that whisper." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some sailors blinked back tears. Others stood taller. An admiral nearby removed his cap, holding it over his heart. Trump looked at Luke. "Your father would be proud. Son, you carry more than his name, you carry his legacy." Applause began softly, then spread through the hangar until it thundered. Luke stood trembling, not as a hero, but as the keeper of a promise finally fulfilled. His mind flashed back to being 15, sitting beside his father's hospital bed. "Promise me, Luke," his father had whispered. "Serve with honor. And if you ever meet Trump, salute him. He understands duty." Luke had whispered back, "I promise." Days later, his father was gone. That final request had haunted Luke ever since, not because he doubted it, but because it was his father's last words. And now, on a national stage, he had finally delivered. After the speech, Trump led Luke into a ceremonial room lined with historic medals. From a drawer, he retrieved a small velvet box. "This isn't protocol," he said. "It's personal." Inside was a replica commander's medal, engraved with the words, "For legacy and loyalty." Luke's throat tightened. "Sir, I can't." "Yes, you can," Trump interrupted, "because sometimes the smallest salute carries the greatest weight." Luke clutched the medal. "Thank you, sir, for honoring him." Trump nodded. "And thank you for reminding me why I served too." That night, Luke returned to his barracks, placing the medal beside his father's folded flag. His roommates stared in awe. "You were just on every news channel in America." "I didn't mean to be," Luke said quietly. "I just kept a promise." For the first time since his father's funeral, he slept peacefully. The next morning, Luke opened his locker to find an envelope in his mother's handwriting. Inside was a letter and a photo of Commander Harrison during a Persian Gulf deployment. "I saw the news, Luke," she wrote. "You did it. Your father would have cried, just like you did. He always said you'd wear that uniform with more honor than he ever could. I wish he had lived to see yesterday." At the bottom she had scribbled, "P.S. There's something I never told you about your dad. He once turned down a promotion to stay with us. He chose family over rank. He always wondered if that made him less of a patriot." Luke traced his father's face in the photo. For the first time, he understood his father's greatest act of service wasn't just to his country, but to his family. Luke sat in silence, his mother's words still lingering in his mind. He finally whispered, "No, Mom." It made him a better patriot. Later that week, Admiral Gaines, an old friend of Commander Harrison, visited the base and asked for Luke by name. "I served with your father in Bahrain," Gaines said, his voice heavy with memory. "He saved my life." Once his eyes grew misty. Luke's brows furrowed. "He never told me that." "He wouldn't have. Your dad didn't care about medals, just values." Gaines handed him a worn leather notebook. Its cover was cracked, initials carved deep into the surface. "NH, he kept this during his last deployment. It belongs with you now," the admiral said softly. "Read it when you're ready. There's more to him than you know." Luke accepted it with trembling hands, fighting back emotion. Another piece of his father had returned to him. That night, he finally opened the journal. On the first page, in familiar handwriting, it read, "Deployment, May 2004. If anything happens to me, I want Luke to know that being his dad has been my highest rank." Luke's breath caught in his throat. The following pages described missions, routines, and frustrations. But between the reports were notes addressed to his son Luke. "Remember, courage isn't loud. It's doing the right thing when no one is watching. Love your country, but never forget to love your people more. And if you ever meet President Trump, look him in the eye and tell him why I believed in him. Because sometimes leaders forget the people they serve. Remind him." Tears blurred Luke's vision. He realized he had already done exactly that. Inspired, he picked up a pen and began to write. "Dear Mr. President, thank you for listening to me. You didn't have to, most wouldn't have, but you did. And in doing so, you reminded me that even a whisper can carry the weight of a salute." He wrote about his father, about his doubts, and about the promise he had carried for years. He ended with, "This wasn't about politics. It was about promises. And now that it's fulfilled, I feel like my father is finally home." He sealed the letter and addressed it to the White House. For Luke, it wasn't just a note, it was closure. A week later, Luke reached the final pages of the journal. One last entry stopped him cold. "If I don't make it, and Trump ever hears my story, ask him something for me. Ask him why men like me are remembered only after we're gone." Luke froze. His father wasn't only hopeful, he was afraid. Afraid of being forgotten, afraid his service, like so many others, would fade into silence. In that moment, Luke understood the salute wasn't just a promise. It was his father's lifeline, a call for remembrance. 3 days later, Luke received a call. "This is the White House. Please hold for the president." His pulse hammered. Then Trump's voice came through. "Luke, I read your letter. And Admiral Gaines sent me a copy of your father's journal." A pause. "Your father was right. We remember too late. I want to change that." Luke steadied himself. "What do you mean, sir?" "I want to establish a memorial," Trump said, "for those whose names never made the news, but who carried this nation on their shoulders, and I want your father's name to be the first etched in stone." Luke's voice broke. "He'd be honored." "No," Trump replied. "The honor is mine." At the next White House briefing, Trump held the Harrison Journal before the cameras. "We celebrate heroes with parades and medals," he said, "but too often we forget the quiet ones, the ones who gave without recognition. Today, I'm announcing the Silent Salute Memorial, a place to honor those everyday warriors, and the first name engraved will be Commander Nathan Harrison." Gasps echoed through the press room. Watching on TV, Luke's hand trembled as he touched the medal resting on his desk. For the first time, his father's voice felt alive again, this time heard by the nation. Months later, Luke stood at Arlington before a gleaming black marble wall. Families, veterans, and media filled the grounds. Trump placed a hand on Luke's shoulder as they unveiled the memorial. The first name shown, in white stone, Commander Nathan Harrison. Trump spoke with gravity. He wasn't a celebrity. He didn't seek glory. But he stood tall for this nation. And because his son whispered a truth, we will never forget him. Luke saluted, tears streaming. This time, it wasn't just for a promise, it was for every father, every hero, every silent salute. After the ceremony, messages poured into Luke's inbox. Veterans thanked him. Widows shared their stories. One note read, "My son always felt invisible after losing his dad in service. Your story gave him pride again. Thank you." Luke answered each message personally. He hadn't meant to start a movement, but he had. Perhaps that was his father's final gift, transforming his son into a voice for others. A year later, Luke stood at a military school graduation, invited as a guest speaker. Holding his father's journal and the medal, he told his story now, with pride, but with purpose. Legacy isn't about being remembered by the world, he said, it's about being remembered by one person and living worthy of that memory. The cadets erupted in applause. As he stepped off stage, a young woman in uniform approached. My father served with yours. He spoke of him often. Luke smiled softly, then we share a legacy. She saluted. Luke returned it, struggling to hold back tears. Years later, Luke sat on a bench near the memorial wall, now a decorated officer himself. A small boy approached, holding his father's hand. Are you the sailor who whispered to the president? The boy asked shyly. Luke nodded. I am. What did you say? Luke smiled gently. Something for someone I loved. Something that changed more than I ever imagined. The boy leaned closer. Can I whisper too? Luke bent down. The boy whispered. Tell your dad, thank you. Luke's eyes filled with tears. Looking up at the wall, he whispered one last time. Did you hear that, Dad? They remember.